Let me start with a question. You see all this collage of different pictures. What is the single word that would name all of them, that could be a title to all of them? Come on. Absolutely, of course, it's a network. And in a way, I'm obsessed by networks because this was one of the key words yesterday when you were listening to many speeches, but it was always used in terms of networks of different technologies, network technology. And I refer to a network to refer to human beings, to people. And I do it because, technology is fascinating, but how many of you would say that managing people is more difficult than managing technologies? Put your hands up. Wow. Okay, so let's do a little bit of thinking about how we can bring the world of technology with the world of people to change what we're doing. Now, here you have a number of logos. These are different organizations that I've worked with, that I had an insight that I changed, or even were part of the founding team. In one block, you have the silos of business. In the second block, you have a silos of great universities. And then you have a silos of different government organizations. And the word ecosystem was just resonating here before a second ago. How to combine them? And this is difficult anywhere in the world, but it is very difficult in Europe for a number of reasons. And shall we be able to overcome this and create this silos into a network to bring best research universities we have, to bring best companies, and then to bring government agencies? Europe is such a powerhouse in all these aspects. But what is missing? Well, one of the things that is missing is that we have very limited capacity to overcome the silos, to help people collaborate, to work together. And I would like to engage you in a network thinking exercise that I will walk you a little bit as the underlying driver for growth in Europe. In Europe that I care a lot because I'm part of the generation that was born in the communist Poland, and I know what has happened with my country thanks to Europe. Today, which the World Bank says that it's second to South Korea, the most successful country in the world in terms of speed with which we got to high-income countries. So I do believe that network thinking can bring Europe towards new growth models. Of course, always engaging technology, because technology is an underlying system. But don't get me wrong, or don't assume that technology is driving change. It's humans, it's people who drive the change. Technology is an enabler. It's absolutely critical engagement, but if we focus too much on technology, well, then growth doesn't really happen. So let me take you through this little journey. Now, how many of you have this challenge? And put just your hands up. How many of you ask themselves a question, how to grow in the fast-changing world where old economies have broken down? And when you look at Europe, which used to be an economic powerhouse, an industrial powerhouse, back still from the 18th century towards just a couple of decades ago, and then suddenly everything changed. Barcelona was deserted. I'm saying Barcelona because back at a time, it was the second most industrialized metropolitan zone in the world, and then suddenly the production moved out. There was huge polygonos with a question what to do with them. So the old economies have broken down in many sectors. How many of you ask themselves this question, how to grow? Okay. And how many of you have this need, number one, do you think that you need to innovate constantly? You know, there are many organizations that don't need to innovate. There are businesses that are simply, have a product, a milk cow that you just do what you do and you don't change anything because it goes really well. But how many of you need to innovate constantly? Hands up. Okay, 2/3 again. And a tricky question. You can function in a number of different ways, but to how many of you that need to innovate, operating through networks matters? Okay, pretty many. So I've been thinking about this question because for a number of years I've been doing research with a pretty interesting intellectual who's over the last 20 years has been #1 most quoted communication scholar. And he coined the term network society. And I was trying to understand why in certain places in the world suddenly these ecosystems emerge, seemingly out of nowhere. Out of Shockley semiconductors in the Silicon Valley, which actually gave the birth of the Silicon Valley phenomenon. Out of the the hiccup, of Nokia in Helsinki, which gave rise to all the entrepreneurial drive over there. Out of the fall of the communist system in my part of the world, which created this entrepreneurial drive. How does this happen that in certain places you have entrepreneurship and innovation flourish? And the book is a way to explain why innovation happens in certain places. And I was thinking, okay, research is good and it's important, but really what I cared about is making impact, is to translate what I know into a process that can help organizations, governments, universities collaborate. Because this is, after all, this network thinking that brings them together, that makes things grow exponentially beyond technology. Now, you can say growth if you're speaking of a impact investment, or if you speak about the city policy, and you can say simply business model, because a business model is a proxy for growth, right? So this methodology can be used for both. What you see here on the picture is a very interesting piece of technology. It's a 3D printed network, a network that is done by little circles in a new 3D hub of HP in Barcelona. And those circles don't touch each other. Really technological challenge how to do this. And I like this picture a lot. But what is this innovation through network thinking? Well, I tried to make it as simple as possible. If research is complicated, then it's always difficult to reach and to make impact. So I said, okay, you basically need to have knowledge. You need to understand how networks work. Then you need to have a formula to be able to create a network, and then you need to have a way of managing and growing the networks. Let me quickly walk you through this. So #1 is very analytical. I guess most of you are engineers, and this network thinking canvas help you put in a structured way what networks you are part of, me, you, they, why they multiply in certain locations, and there needs to be a critical mass in a given ecosystem that unless those networks of universities, of different industry associations, of investors, of serial angels, they overlap and they're multi-layer, things will not happen because there will be not enough force locally. But they can be in one location and still function in silos. So what you need is what we call here a switching capacity. You need to have a structural connection, or you need to have an institutional connection, or a human connection to be able to interconnect and to transfer talent, knowledge, and funding across these networks. Well, the networks have certain protocols, and we work with teams, we work with diverse ecosystem members to explain different communication protocols and programming protocols, to have them, build trust and have them be empowered by ability to create joint projects. But what is most interesting, it's a question of power in networks. Well, the traditional leadership models, you know them well, right? It's usually command and control, right? You tell somebody to do, it doesn't do so you fire, right? It's very rational, you have management by objectives. But how do you manage a network? It's a very different skill set and a very different ability and a very different values how to hold the network together. And the question of power in networks is absolutely fundamental for the leaders of tomorrow. Now, what would be the model for Europe to grow beyond the crisis? Every enterprise, every ecosystem, every country or continent has its own model of growth. There's no copy-paste. You have certain specificity, and then you need to develop your own understanding. 10 years ago, when Lehman Brothers were announced bankrupt, we, as the founding board of the EIT, well, you hear the nice acronym MIT EIT, we met. EIT stands for European Institute of Innovation and Technology. And this was the ambition to create an institution for the 21st century that could create an impact comparable to MIT, an impact for Europe, for European future generation. So the question was, you know, in the dawn of what was to turn out the most difficult economic crisis in our part of the world, in many member states, many economies, what would be this growth model beyond the crisis? And, you know, network is absolutely the core concept here. You need to unite Europe by creating all sorts of networks. And for Europe, at a time, you know, we believe that research, education, innovation is what needs to be united. For me, coming from, you know, emerging markets of Central and Eastern Europe, I believe there is one key component missing in all these advanced economies of Western Europe. And I saw how modest we were, and the driving force in our country was entrepreneurship. Sometimes low-tech, sometimes mid-tech, rarely high-tech, but all this entrepreneurial culture, taking risk, trying again, building institutions, building new research institutes, building democratic institutions, building companies. This was very important. And this element was very much missing. And a session before, an interesting comment happened that last 10 years was a generation shift. That 10 years ago, in many ecosystems, entrepreneurship was absolutely the missing link. Today, it's a very different story. And the growth model for Europe that we developed at a time was a network, bringing these 4 elements together. Research, education, innovation, you need to sum them up, but then the enabler, the multiplier, is entrepreneurship. So, you know, it's easy to say, but ecosystem takes time to develop. And if you're a young startup company, you want to access markets faster. But probably you have a solution where either a government would be your best client, or that to access a market, you need to bring multiple stakeholders. Maybe you develop a new medical device. You need to work with hospitals and with patients and with regulators. How do you do this? Well, so innovation is actually a process of learning to become. And I think that this is the key aspect, that nothing is today cast in stone. Nothing is nothing is a finished process. It's ever coming. And this learning to become is actually a question of identity. Who we are as humans, and some of the shifts that European managers and leaders have most difficulty with is, number one, a shift from control-based management to trust-based management, from competition and very transaction-based culture to collaboration and relationship-based culture, from bureaucratic functioning to very entrepreneurial mindset. And as my colleague Mariana Mazzucato rightly says, state needs to be more entrepreneurial if businesses are to flourish. And then a funny component as well, you know, we all feel better functioning in very tight networks. I call it here tightly knit networks. We feel well in closed environments where we feel secure, when we feel we can share. But then to succeed today, you need to do this, and at the same time be loosely coupled globally. Again, a very different skill set. So we help teams of managers, of ecosystem members, come from being a homo saber and homo faber, so being people who know and who can do things, to be a person who can become. And this happens through a digital world and through the human, still face-to-face interaction. And it's about hanging up, geeking out, and messing around. And this is most fun of the process, where people are engaged like children, playing together to develop those new skills and new projects within a company or beyond. Just a few examples. Sales is absolutely more critical than access to funding for many companies, big and small. And there are radical innovations coming in the sales, how you manage sales. This process can help you look at your sales network in a different way. It can help you look at the open science in a different way. Some of you may know here, who is this? Do you know? Tim Berners-Lee, absolutely. Would you ever think that what we nickname as internet is actually a European invention? Well, internet is not, but World Wide Web is. And Tim Berners-Lee, I listened to a very interesting interview. He said, I did not want to patent the World Wide Web. What would happen? You know how rich we would be? He developed this at CERN. And the red buses that you see here is actually a new innovation at CERN that's created Idea Square Lab to bring cutting-edge science with entrepreneurship projects, right? Again, in this open science environment. And the last example is about the EIT. 10 years after, there are over 600 companies created. There are thousands of students who have taken entrepreneurship course somewhere at the university. And there are dozens of products that were faster transferred from European labs to markets and society. So I do believe that this network thinking helps if you're fragmented. And we do live in a very fragmented world, although we seem more connected than ever. I don't think that the world has become flat. I think the world is networked. Thank you very much, and be welcome to Barcelona.